comparative.
Let me summarize a little bit because Heather needs it, and they said the person in Oklahoma will need it too. There are many ways of solving conflicts, and we were saying that the conflicts generally are between whatever superego we introjected, which is a variable structure because it partly depends on who you are, what your resources are, who your parents are, and what your culture is, and what influence are there in your life that becomes introject that you finally, take in and then become your ethical commands. And obviously that's very variable from one culture to another. In some cultures, certain things that are perfectly acceptable that here will be totally unacceptable and so on. So it depends where you are born. And that has some implications for analysts, because you cannot impose on people your set of beliefs. And analysts, though nobody's perfect and we are all human beings, have to learn and train themselves to put aside whatever set of beliefs they are entitled to have, And these are your own. When you see, let's say you're a Christian and you see an agnostic person, you have to accept his set of beliefs, whatever they are, and you can argue with that. You just take it the way it is. You try to keep your own set of beliefs outside of that realm, which is not always necessarily easy, but analysts train themselves to do that, to become neutral in inverted commas, so that they can use the set of belief of the patient and understand the conflicts of the patient in terms of their own set of beliefs, not yours. In your culture, something might be terrible that the patient does that in his culture it is not. And so you have to make the assumption that though that may become maladaptive if he has transferred himself from one country to another where that is not acceptable, in his culture developmentally, that did not create a problem because that was acceptable there. Obviously, if that is not a conflict, and he is sufficiently capable and has a good enough ego, he'll be able to make an adaptation to the new culture and put that aside in order not to get in trouble with the conflict. That's different. See, in a neurotic conflict, you don't have a choice. You cannot make that determination. I will change my behavior. Your behavior is automatic. And it's either anxiety or the production of a symptom or the restriction or whatever it is. So all of these things have implications in this sense to what it is that you do. In any case, we were saying that the structure of the sexual drive is complex, and that is well past what people think of as sexual intercourse. Being sexual is, sexual intercourse. And as you know, Freud did that because he was observing human behavior and what the range of behaviors were that people use for sexual interaction with one another, and it was obviously well past the genitals. It's not only the communion of the genitals that is sexuality in an adult world. There are many other elements. He was looking, as I told you, at things that were at the time called perversions, not necessarily in a pejorative sense, but which clearly demonstrated that human being can use practically any erotogenic zone as a genital. And in fact, in lieu of the genital, or a substitute for a genital. And so all of that extended the concept of the sexual enormously. And in good time, as you know, the libidinal developed, including several phases. An oral stage, a lot of oral activities are part of the sexual drive. An anal stage, whether we like it or not, and may sound disgusting, is part of the sexual drive in a large number of people, and it's important for a large number of people in one way or another. not so for others, it's variable. We are all different for many reasons. And there is then finally a phallic Oedipal stage, and then latency, and then the changes that take later on in puberty, which is the development of the gonads and things of that kind. So because of that, the concept of sexuality is enormously extended, and at the beginning was quite shocking to the culture. When Freud started to talk about these things as being sexual, ignorant people, I don't know what to call it, prudish people were trying to say, oh, these people has a very dirty mind, everything is sexual for these people. Well, if they are realistic and look at human behavior and the range of phenomena that is involved in sexual activities, all of these things are part of it. Indeed, Freud thought and discovered that there is a sequence of the libidinal development that goes by stages, and the stages are typical for every human being. We all go through them. And the other concept that is important around this is that then the sexual drive is not one entity, but it's made up. It's like a mosaic, like a Roman mosaic, that you see the figure finally, but it's constituted by innumerable little pieces that form the figure. Well, these innumerable little pieces are the things that we call component instincts. All right? And as you know, every component instinct usually has an erotogenic zone that is the base of the component instinct. You have a home, so to say, and this home is typical for every component instinct. And these component instincts tend to come into the foreground in a certain sequence. And the sequence follows the anal, the phallic, and then latency, and so on. So that's important, because this component instinct of the sexual instinct, are the ones that we get into conflict with. People have oversimplified these things, but in reality, many of the problems that lead to neurosis are conflict with specific aspects of the sexual drive, which means with one or another or several of the different component instincts, which are not acceptable for one reason or another. And that's where the conflict lies. It's not with the whole thing, it's with certain aspects of the thing. And innumerable examples of this. If you saw the tapes, you would have heard innumerable examples of this type of phenomena, Now, so that's with the sexual drive. With the aggressive drive, it's exactly the same thing. The problem being that we know a heck of a lot less about the aggressive drive than we do about the sexual drive. So probably in a way that is not the most elegant or efficient way of doing it, we have made a parallel between the aggressive drive and the oral drive, and it's a tenable parallel. So the aggressive drive has an oral stage, has an anal stage, and has a phallic Oedipal stage, and these things can be, oral aggression is different from anal aggression, anal forms of expression of aggression, or phallic Oedipal expression of aggression. Again, if you saw the tapes, then you will understand how they are different, why they are different, and how they get modified as the ego develops, as the child develops introjects and things of that kind, For example, aggression is brutal in the anosadistic stage, and a toddler is incredibly dangerous that way because he gets enraged, and not having a good ego to know the consequences of his behavior, he will hit you with anything he has in his hand at that particular point when he's in your arms. He gets angry at you, and it's in a flash. He can switch very, very quickly. He was loving a second ago, now he's suddenly enraged. And that he has no ability to modulate that. It's brutal, crude aggression, which some people cannot master.
Mm-hmm.
And these are people that later on will be maybe sadistic criminals and will do horrendous things to other human beings on impulse. You know what I mean? They never master this particular phenomenon. Obviously, not to do that puts you at risk and a lot of people around you at risk as well. On the other hand, once he moves to the phallic ripple stage, there is a phenomenon that, if you remember, we call fusion in the lectures. And that means that there is an admixture of the libidinal drive and the sexual drive. And so it gets tamed. And at that point, because of that phenomenon of the fusion, and because the child's ego in the cognitive sense of the word and his understanding of the consequences of his action has increased, then he is willing to fight with rules. He no longer, when he's angry with you, he won't come and kick you, hit you in the back. The rules come in. Yes, you can fight, but you don't hit anybody in the back, you don't hit anybody that is on the ground, and they accept this. They can control the behavior. You are a toddler, you can do that. Why? For two reasons. One, your impulse is brutal. It's pure culture of aggression. And two, you don't have the cognitive capacity to control it at all. Now, if you get fixated at that stage, though your ego may grow, you might never put together the capacity to control it with the brutality of the impulse. And that's why you are extremely dangerous later on. Now, in regression,
mm-hmm.
somebody that fuses it,
Mm-hmm.
which means now his aggression is more acceptable and is within rules and can be controlled and it is not brutal, it's not murderous aggression. If he regresses, that fusion will be undone, and we call that diffusion, and then he's back in a square one. And that's one of the problems in symptom formation, because when people regresses, now they have an ego and a superego that did not exist during the anal stage. They didn't understand the brutality of their impulses, and they didn't have an awareness of the consequences of their behavior, their aggressive behavior. They did not have introject saying, that's bad, you can do that, you're a bad person when you do that. Now they do. But with the regression and the diffusion, the impulse is again brutal as it was, but now it has an ego and a superego that is high up here in horror at the intensity and the brutality of these impulses. You understand what I mean? And that creates a heck of a conflict, which didn't exist as the child was going through that stage, because, the different areas of development were more or less balanced, or imbalanced, it'd be a proper word. He didn't have enough ego to understand the consequences of his behavior, and he didn't have introject to control it either. Now he has acquired that. So if one aspect of this equation becomes regress and go to the pure culture aggressive, intensive, murderous impulses, your ego and your superego are horrified of yourself, and they have to use very drastic defenses, right, in order to control that behavior. If you don't, then you're a sadistic murderer. You will murder somebody brutally. If you do, then you develop symptoms. Either they may be, you may repress your aggression completely so that you have none, even when you need it, it's not available. You have repressed all of it because otherwise you are sure that you're not going to kill anyone. Or you may do a variety of other things. You can produce reaction formation, you can sublimate it and become, I don't know, a boxer or any activity that allows you.
Fighting for human rights.
Yeah. That will be a possibility. Yeah? Though you have to be careful with these things, because like anything else, it's like a surgeon bisturi, knife. Can be used to do a lot of good, it can kill when misused. And some people will take that bisturi that was meant to be used appropriately and use it as a weapon to hurt somebody, So you have to be careful. I say that because I mentioned to you in the past that when I was in London, there were a lot of anti-war people, anti-nuclear bomb people that were marching from Alderstone. I was in the north of England. There was a base. There was an American base there. And they marched there all the way to London. And they were pushing the parents, the babies. They were against the war, which in itself, not against the war so much against atomic bombs, the use of atomic bombs, which, is a very reasonable position to take. They don't do anybody any good. But when we saw these tapes, we saw some people there on occasion that we knew as child abusers. You understand what I mean? So what they were doing, as you see, is trying to control by displacing into another arena their brutal behavior to the children. So you have to be careful. It may be a true, genuine sublimation, or it may be one that is still at the purpose of the gratification of the impulse. It's just done to appease your superego. You're being good. In fact, you are allowing yourself to gratify your brutality with your child. You see what I mean? So you have to be careful always when you look at these things. And as I always say, take things with a pinch of salt. Until you are sure that you don't need the pinch of salt. In any case, that's the aggressive drive.
Excuse me, Dr. Nada.
Yeah.
Once the fusion takes place, then is pretty much all of the phallic aggression in the service of sexuality, normal sexual intercourse, is that it?
Yes, it always is. In fact, in the normal sexual intercourse, there is a certain amount of aggression that is required to perform, particularly for the male, to perform sexual intercourse. And there is always is, once that stage has been taken and fusion has taken place, very rarely sexual activities don't have an aggressive element in it, but it's a well-tamed, put to very good use sexual element. Okay?
Yeah.
So, let's for a moment think about this. Because at the moment we are only talking about instincts, right? And we're talking about component instincts. And of course, those of the sexual drive are much better known to us and much better described, and their homes are better known, in the form of erotogenic zones than those component instincts of the aggressive drive. But as I told you, we have made a parallel. And so we talk of oral aggression, which has many forms and has two sub-stages, just like, the libidinal drive does. And in one of them, it's very destructive because the mouth is used as a destructive organ, and symbolically it can be used to destroy the object. You eat the object. Indeed, we do that, Even in certain religions, we eat the object,
Transubstantiation.
Huh?
Transubstantiation.
Yeah. And whatever the symbolic meaning of all of that is, but obviously it has some significant meaning for human beings. And whatever I'm not trying to demean religions in any form, but obviously all human behavior has more than one meaning and is based in more than one type of psychological phenomena, and it might lend itself to express a large number of different things. It's like dreams, they have many labels, of meaning, and this is the same. So, as I say, with the aggressive drive, it's a little more difficult to do that. But we know enough to get by, let's say. And if you, as I said, if you saw the tapes, there are examples there of all the levels of aggression and how this happens and what the meaning of it all is and what kind of problem it leads into and how you can produce solution to the developmental conflicts that get produced as you get older in terms of these instincts and what do you have to do with it, because we have not necessarily to suppress them, but to control them and to gratify them only in ways that are socially adaptable and socially acceptable to our culture. And as I told you a moment ago, not all cultures make the same demands or forbid the same things in the same ways. And what is happening today in the world is a good example of that phenomena, how certain cultures not only do not forbid certain behavior, but encourage it and think that they are desirable and that you are doing something that is pretty good. You know, if you think of some of the religious components to this behavior in these cultures. And the rewards that you are supposed to get is not only that you don't get punished, you get rewarded by doing things that in our culture you say, Jesus, how can you possibly do that? That's criminal behavior. How can you kill people this way in that brutal kind of form with no humane concern of any kind of type? And yet in these cultures it's a good thing, you know. So you see the difference. So that's the conflict with the instinct. And that's where all it starts. So analysts be well advised to always think that when you have a patient that has produced symptoms, deep down, when you follow the roots of the tree that expresses the symptoms, if you go down into the ground, in some way in that root, it's one of these component instances of either of these two groups of drives. And obviously, instinct gets manifested in a variety of ways and behaviors, all right? And get manifested in the interaction between two people. As they say, it takes two to tango. So your sexual drive generally looks, once you reach the genital stage, yes, and your sexual activities and your component instinct don't have the autoerotic quality that they had before, yeah, you need an object. What type of object depends on what your sexual identity became like, you know. If you have a heterosexual sexual identity, then you will look for an object of the opposite sex. If you don't, you look for an object of the same sex. Sex, just the same. What I'm trying to tell you is that at that point, the manifestation of the instinct is not as visible in the form of the instinct itself, the primitive thing that led to the behavior and the interaction between these two people, and whatever the hell it is that they do together, not only sexually, but as a result of the relationship that develops through the sexual interaction or the sexual gratification or the gratification of the sexual impulses with one another, yeah? And so that will be more visible in the interaction with the object. And you will say, oh, he's abusive to the object. He has to hurt the object. He has to be abusive. He has to demean it. He has to hit the object. He has to whatever it is. And we call that object relationships. And that's what it is. But if you leave it at that, you are describing what's happened as a consequence of the drive that are motivating that behavior. And you are staying somewhere in the tree. You are not going down to the root of the problem. The roots of the problem are probably in the anal sadistic stage and in the anal sadistic drives. What you see in behavior is a manifestation of that in an interaction with another human being. object relationists will leave it there. They would just look at the relationship and deal with the relationship and leave it at that. Is that useful? Yeah, to some degree it is useful. Does it exhaust the nature of the problem that you are observing? No. Obviously not. It's leaving the problem halfway to the origin of the phenomena. You understand what I mean? And in some cases, dealing at this level is good enough, particularly when people has good egos and good superegos that can then establish firm controls and ignore the drive, sit on the drive. But in other people, that you don't go down there, they can do that. The drive is too strong, and in order to be able to help them, they have to understand where it is coming from and what they can do in order to deal with that, and you have to help them to resolve these fixations and find better, more active forms of gratification, these impulses. You know, they have obviously been fixated to a form of gratification which is enormously prejudicial to other human beings, will damage their object relationship forever. You understand what I'm saying? There are then other people that, when we get to the ego side of things, ego apparatus, ego functions, ego defenses, take that and only look at the defenses against this, that, and the other, and deal at that level. And they say, oh, you have to deal with the defense before you do anything with what is hidden by the defense. And that's true. But if you leave it at there, you don't have the job only. And that's some ego psychologists which misunderstand what ego psychology is. That's what they do. What I'm trying to tell you is that people get married to one part theory and don't see the whole situation. They are only looking at a part of the phenomena and ignoring what may be the very reason, the thread of the phenomena. You know?
To use a metaphor, they're like component instincts.
That's correct. That's correct. So, some people are ego psychologists. They never go past that level. Some people are object relationists. They never go past looking at what happened in the relationship. They never go past to see how come that this relationship has this characteristic and what is leading to it and what is the motivation for it. Well, if you did that, there are only things that do that, instincts. The rest, what we call longings, wishes, fantasies, imaginations, all of them come from there. It's what you want to do with this, it's how you want to gratify them, whether it is in a normal fashion, in an acceptable fashion, in an unacceptable one, in a brutal one, in a kind one. It depends on what you are using. You use reaction formation, you may become very kind to the object. If you use sublimation, you may be terrific. If you don't do that, the closer you are to the instinct, the more it will manifest itself ego-wise, which means ego interests, ego inclinations, ego preferences, ego activities, ego choices. A lot of things ego-wise will be different according to what is behind, what is feeding these interests, these choices, and so on. You see what I mean? So if you leave it there and look at the defensive aspects of it and ego functions and how the functions are affected and so on, you are doing half the job.
Okay, question for you. Okay, let's so let's say somebody has a really strong aggressive drive and made it through the phallic stage, but they haven't really tapped into it. They haven't really fused very well. Would this be the kind of person who would end up doing like rough sex and killing somebody?
Could be.
Could be somebody like that.
Could be. Doesn't necessarily have to be, but it could be.
Okay.
It's obviously a mixture of factors.
Okay.
It depends on the intensity of the drive.
Yeah.
Even if you have mastery, but it's not too strong, it may not lead you to kill. If it is very strong, aggressive drive, and you have no reins on it, and it's of an anal sadistic type, brutal type, the toddler type in the anaphylaxis stage, you are dangerous like hell. And in an act of rage, you may hurt somebody real bad or kill them. Worse than that, you behave like the toddler.
Okay.
In other words, you have no guilt, you have no sympathy, you have no empathy for the object that you have destroyed. You are joyful in the destructive act.
Like that.
Like the toddler is joyful in hitting you with whatever he had got, or biting you, or hitting you with his head, or whatever it is that he does, And that's the difference. An enormous difference.
That would be somebody who's fixated as opposed to the regression.
Generally speaking, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Generally speaking, is somebody that have very strong drives, probably got stuck in there and did not develop the other side of the equation, which is the ego side, in the sense that he may not have been well endowed by, a good ego, good skills, good intelligence, good ability to be empathic, to understand suffering and things of that kind. Just like a mentally retarded, That's where you hear a lot of lawyers frequently trying to say, oh, he's mentally retarded, he's not responsible for his behavior. And if that were true, it's true. He had no awareness. He's like a toddler, and no awareness of the consequences of his behavior. You understand what I'm saying? So, now other people are, for example, self-psychologists. Yeah? What have they done? They look at the development of the self, yes, and stay there. It's all in terms of what happened to the self, usually in relation to the objects. They too tend to ignore what role is played by your own instinctual life in what happens to the self, and how that manifests itself in such a way in the external world that the objects will react to you according to what you present to them. See, it takes two to tango, always. When you have somebody that gets, a parent that gets very annoyed at a child, it may be that he's of the world and he's being annoyed inappropriately. But it may be that the child is provoking that, Why? Either intently or because his instinctual endowment is such that that's all he can do, And, he's a child that, what will I tell you, that he does something bad, gets punished, and he becomes defiant. It's worse, which further irritates the parent and makes him even more punitive and perhaps even quite inappropriate, in the way he behaves. Now, obviously, an adult shouldn't do that, but adults are human beings. And human beings are far from perfect. None of us is perfect. None of us. Not even Freud was perfect. Right? No analyst is perfect. So, so it goes. So I want you to understand that this can be seen at many levels and taken from many levels. And when you think of the psychoanalytic theory of the neurosis, and if you tend to be an object relationist, of which there are any number in this field, you will tend to look at it in a certain way. And your last station, you stop a station, is long way away from the instinctual roots. If you become an ego psychologist, you may be in danger of doing the same. If you are a self-psychologist, you may be in danger of doing the same for different reasons, and you will understand the phenomena in a different way. Now, what is interesting is that all of these things are important, but not if you operate in the principle of the pars pro toto, that you take a piece of this table and then I say, oh, this is the whole table. I ignore the rest of it. I take this part of the table, yeah? I said, this is the whole table. And these three other pieces are not there. Well, they should be there. Because for this meeting, you have to sit around this table. That's what the table really is. This piece is an important part of it, and you can describe it in great detail, but it's not the whole table. You understand what I'm saying? All right. So, when do we stop this thing? We should have stopped already, right?
No. 4:15.
4:30 we go? And then 5.
Start again at
To
4:30.
4:15. We have a
4
break.
4:15
to
or so.
4:30.
We stop at 4:15? Okay. All right. Let's, I hope you understand what I'm trying to tell you. I'm not trying to say that either self-psychologists or your psychologists or object relationists are wrong. I'm trying to tell you that analysis should be all of this.
Can you give an example of how you would talk to a patient about the drives, you know that they're fixated in the anal phase, and you know that you need to go back. What is?
Well, it's difficult to do it in cold blood. You have to have a patient. And when you have a continuous case seminar, I will have one with you. Okay. I can show you that in vivo.
Okay.
No. But it's not that difficult. It's, let's say that you have somebody that does, I don't know, plays with feces and an adult. Don't think they don't.
Right.
They do. In whatever way or whatever it is. And he's puzzled, maybe feels very guilty and very ashamed to tell you that he likes his pieces and plays with it, maybe eats them, or God knows what, or has a sexual practice. I found a sexual partner that allows him to cover it in, things of that kind. Well, it's very relatively easy, little bit by little bit, to show him that now is such a problem. There was a time in life that children did do that, and it was normal at that particular point in life. In other words, when you are a toddler, and you are not yet toddler trained, and you have no idea that feces is something that people doesn't welcome, all right? And you have not developed that knowledge. That's what you do. And that's what he's doing now. So that's coming from somewhere back there. Mm-hmm. And you need to look at what may have been that didn't allow him to grow out of that place.
Yeah.
You understand what I mean?
But it's so inaccessible. What is the curative? They can't remember. Or
Oh, no. Of course he can remember.
Right.
But...
other than an intellectual exercise, what is the curative?
Oh, no, there is no intellectual exercise at all. In fact, people free associates, and free association is like an enormous net of a fisherman. Yeah? Maybe the problem, the hole is in the middle of the net, and you can get to that place in 1,000 different ways, going from knot to knot, from knot to knot, from knot to knot, until you get to the center of the thing. And that's what you do. And you obviously have to have the skills to do that, and understand development, and understand how symptoms are formed, how fixation gets established, how whatever gets fixated leads to symptom formation of what type, how that affects superego development and ego development. And if you really have it all put together, there is nothing. The last thing that an analysis is an intellectual exercise. If that is what it is, you are not in analysis. That's the last thing an analysis should be. A true therapeutic analysis or a true training analysis shouldn't be an intellectual exercise. It should be a therapeutic analysis. And it should be conducted in exactly the same way. And there is nothing intellectual about it. You get there. Obviously, you have to use your brain. That's intellectual, but you get there.
So in a sense, what you're saying is that there are going to be elements of self-psychology, ego psychology, object relations that are going to manifest itself
Absolutely.
like different points on the net. But through associations, they're going to all lead to the core or the drive at some point. Though the root could be very circuitous, may involve presenting themselves in dreams, free associations, etc.
Absolutely. You get there in good time. And what you do is like you do with dreams. You remember when we were describing the dream work phenomenon and how this got this gas and this place and condense and move from here to there and found conditions that represent. Well, that's what symptom formation is. That's why I was telling you what we're doing. The dream work, that if you understood that well, you understood symptom formation and the theory of the neurosis. That's the way it happens. Now what you do is you go back and reconstruct it little bit by little bit until you get to that call. How do you do that? By means of reassociations, like you do with the dream, you know. And then you have accumulated knowledge. You have heard all kinds of things about what happened to these patients through life, and you have put all of that together. Some of it you have to reconstruct, but if you get enough pieces, enough charts, and you are an expert archaeologist, you say, oh, this is a pot from the 13th century, and it belonged to such and such a culture. You only have a few charts, but you can reconstruct the pot. You see what I mean? And analysts do that. They do that. They get information. Once they have enough information, they know how did it happen, and they can go back there. And you'd be surprised. You don't have to remember exactly the event. That is not possible when it is very early, that you won't recover that. But all the evidence, that's what a reconstruction is, points in the direction that unless this happened, you couldn't possibly be behaving in this way. And that has an enormous amount of conviction. You know, if you are on the right track. You are not on the right track, it doesn't, you know. So no, there's nothing intellectual about it. I can tell you, it's hard work. You know, it's not easy to get there. It takes a lot of knowledge, some experience, and an enormous amount of patience and an enormous curiosity, and a kind of a special alertness that therapists have to develop to follow the patient and to store it and make connections. You have to learn to do that, so that what you hear today, you say, oh, but this has meaning in terms of what I heard last week, or this has meaning, like with the patient you presented to me, in terms of the dream that you presented at the beginning of the week, you see, and you do that. Through time, you accumulate an enormous amount of information. You are moving in the next, you know.
In a way, though, when you get to the point of, let's say, establishing that all of the things that are presented could only make sense if this were true, what ultimately allows the patient to accept that is not logic, but resonance with the unconscious memory of the event.
Absolutely. You don't have to remember.
It's not a logical conviction.
You don't have to remember the event.
It's a connecting in so many ways that the patient.
Remember when we were talking of neurosciences and psychoanalysis? All of these things have made paths that are like hardwired in your brain. When you, by means, verbal means, yes, and gradual means of getting there, you like this path, you may not remember it consciously, in the sense, oh, I remember what my mother did to me, or how many enemas I gave. You may not know that. But the path, the hardwire is lighted, and you have an internal conviction. This is true.
Okay.
Not only is that true, the path may be smoothed out gradually, and you develop a different path. You don't have to go there. You don't have to light that again in relation to other events that happen to you through your life, you know. And it takes time. You cannot exhaust something that has been hardwired in 5 minutes or with one interpretation. That's absurd. That's why analysts have the concept of working through. Yeah.
It's like a runner building capillaries.
Huh?
Like a runner building capillaries.
Absolutely.
Earlier, Amy was asking about a clinical application of the concept of personality style and interpersonality and how problem in that area manifests itself as an adult, and how you would discuss that with the patient. And I was thinking that this might be one would be, people who collect and value objects over people, and they keep obsessively collecting, and they didn't realize that their conversations are about getting the perfect widget, the blue widget, the purple widget, and they don't realize they never talk about people. Their relationships are all really shitty. It's probably a good way to put it. And that's one of the examples that I've found where it's would be the perfect time to slip in the idea of anality and about the collecting, money, collecting, and follow it, trace it through. I think that would be the kind of clinical application that you were asking about. When does it? Can you change it from a theoretical concept to a clinical application? And in my own personal life, I found that really is true.
Yeah, but you see, that patient, which is a hypothetical patient, has changed by means of displacement and condensation. That he was searching for a perfect object, and is now, in terms of a perfect mother or a perfect father or whatever it was, somebody who didn't hurt him, was a good father, was comfortable, whatever. And he is not any longer aware of that. Now he's looking for a perfect piece of art, which means he has displaced it from here to there. And of course, there is no perfect piece of art. He'll be keeping looking forever. So will whoever is looking for a perfect father, there is no such a thing. But you see, at some point, you can find enough in what he has told you that you can at some point say, oh, I see now. What he has done is displaced from here to here. And the conflict is this, and it's leading to this behavior. You see?
And patients can
That's ego interest. You see? He developed ego interest. If you are an ego psychologist, you may stay in the ego interest. If you are a real analyst, you look at the ego interest with enormous interest and curiosity, because it will lead you to the root of the conflict that led to that ego interest. And that's the difference. Let me tell you about working through a little bit, because that's important in terms of your question. Let me show you this. What is it?
What?
Your watch.
Huh? What kind of watch is it? Is it automatic? Is it digital? Do you know?
I can't tell.
It's not digital, but it is automatic.
How you know it?
Because it seemed to have
Continuous.
continuous second hand.
But a lot of things.
Well, I guess it could be, yeah.
Things that have that can be have a battery moving in,
Oh, yeah.
or a spring. In other words, if I ask you, you saw the watch, but you don't know anything about the watch.
If
I tell you, what is the maker of the watch? Do you know?
Some people do sometimes, but that's not...
No. I show you this watch.
I personally don't know, but I could see where somebody could. Yeah.
How will he?
A watchmaker.
If he doesn't read it.
Yeah.
If he doesn't read who the maker is, I know who it is. I am reading it. But you can read it from there. From the
So you're
first
saying
time.
that people can have the same symptoms, but there's a completely different history to all of that.
Yeah. Well, that's not the point.
Oh.
The point is that you can look at something and think that you know it, and you don't. You just know the surface of it. In fact, you don't know whether this watch has a spring, and you have to, you don't know if it is digital, you don't know if it moves with it. I show it to you, you think it's gold, or golden, or bronze, or what do you think it is? Do you know? You cannot know. You have to look at the watch some more, and get closer to the watch, and at some point you say, oh, it says here 18 karat, then it's gold. It doesn't say that, then it's obviously golden. You understand? And if you look at the make, you say, oh, it's a Seiko watch. And if I ask you, does it give the time? You don't know. Well, it does give the time, but you have to look at it closer. You have to look at it many times before you can describe this watch to me with some degree of exactitude. That's working through. You discover something, you saw the ear of the rabbit, you haven't seen the whole rabbit. All right? And that's what analysts do. They say, oh, there is the ear of the rabbit. There is a rabbit in there. I know that. But I have now to determine what color is a rabbit, what kind of rabbit, how old is a rabbit, is a female rabbit, a male rabbit, is he sick, is he healthy, does he have a litter of little rabbits, And so that's important in terms of your question. And that's what analysts do. They go back from the symptoms. And you can stay at any one. You can stay at the level of the object relationship. You can describe it in terms of the ego defenses. You can describe it in terms of what happened to the self. And all of that is good, and you should. But if you leave it there, you haven't gotten to the root of the problem. And some patients, particularly those that are very disturbed, until you get there, you don't solve the problem. And people will say, oh, it was not effective. Well, sometimes we can cure everybody, that's true. But a lot of times it is that we don't get where we need to be to achieve the kind of internal conviction, what we call insight, the aha, that people feel. Say, now I know. It doesn't know a damn thing. You lighten the hardware sequence in his brain, and he can identify that real well because it's in his gut. It's a gut reaction. Do you understand what I mean? All right.
Which is literally true.
Uh-huh.
The enteric nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. It's absolutely true. That's what happens. Yeah. That's the transformation of that is into the aha. The aha is, now I understand. Well, that now you understand means that something in your brain is now lighted that has the concordance with the phenomena that has puzzled you up to that point. You know what I mean? That's why at the beginning I did talk to you a little bit about neurosciences and psychoanalysis. Otherwise, you think that all of this happens in thin blue air, and it doesn't. And you don't have to be a neurophysiologist or anything like that, but you have to have some knowledge of how these things relate and how they happen. And then the instrument that we use is communications, it's associations, it's verbal interaction. And they seem to be capable of changing these pathways in the brain, And so you don't, as I said, you don't have to be a neurophysiologist, though it is conceivable that one day the technology will be developed to exhaust that pathway real quick and create a different one. And that it be done in 10 seconds. At which point we will be dead on the water. But it's a long time away, I think. In any case, let me tell you in the next 10 minutes a few things about fixation and regression, because all of this is very important in the mechanism of symptom formation. And it will tell you a great deal. You see, once you identify what fixations a patient has, it's very likely that you know where the problem originated. You may not know how it did get originated or exactly what the nature of the problem was that took place, but you know where to go. It's like knowing, assuming that there is a treasure hidden in some country, it's like knowing in which country it is. You don't know where in the country it is, but you don't have to go to Australia when it is in England. You say, it is in England, let's fly to England. That's where we will find it. And this you do the same. See, if you know that a patient has an anal fixation, that's where you go. In your mind. You say, that's where the problem started. And all I see here is very likely an expression of the different transformation that problem has suffered through time in this particular individual. And this may be many. That's where you move from one point in the next to the next one, and things become clearer and clearer. Once you do that, you start to be a little more focused. It doesn't mean to say that you ignore everything else. You don't, because these things, remember, spread everywhere. In fact, what happens in this phase will influence the next phase, significantly. So it's not that you ignore it, but it's that now you have a signpost and you know how to organize that material in your own mind and what to look for. You are doing detective work, is what you are doing. In any case, in terms both of the libidinal development, and aggressive development, both follows the same path. Let's take the libidinal development. You start here at birth, and the first 6 months to 8 months is an oral passive phase, right? What you do, passive is the wrong description, because you're not that passive, you suck, and that's an activity. But you don't have to do anything. People put things in your mouth and you just suck at whatever they put in your mouth. And now the second one is an oral active one. Why? Because you have developed teeth, and now you can use the teeth actively to destroy the food that you're going to eat. And all of that has transformations, and it modifies itself as you go along. Indeed, during this stage, the child never bites the mother's nipple. Once it is, he may bite the mother's nipple, and she may become quite upset because it hurts, and it can damage the nipple, and sometimes it gets infected, and it creates a hell of a problem where the child has to be weaned, assuming that he's being breastfed, which you assume he is because he's biting the mother's nipple, So, in any case, then you go to here, and there is again a passive and an active phase. In this case, this is called the expulsive phase, subphase, and this is the retentive phase. Retentive, that doesn't need it. Now, why is it called expulsive? Because it happened before you have control of your anal sphincter, so all you can do is let it go. All right? And indeed, people that get fixated there have no control. They let it go. The anger just comes out like a diarrhea. They will. Now, if you are thinking of oral aggression, for example, this is very different from this one. The active one uses the mouth as an instrument for destruction. And it may be through biting, but it may be through language that he can use as a destructive tool, as a weapon, more hurtful than using a gun on somebody, sometimes.
Excuse me, Dr. Nagera. So the oral active, when it is used in terms of language, the distinction from anal expulsive is that the person says things that are hurtful, whereas in oral phase, whereas in the anal expulsive subphase, they will say things that are scatological or filthy, like
sure. It's different form of expression.
Okay.
Good. What you do with your mouth is not what you do with your body products when they come out.
Okay. Well,
and they have these characteristics, obviously. And then you get to the phallic Oedipal phase. If you remember when we were talking the other day, we were talking of the developmental interferences, the neurotic conflicts, the infantile neurosis. That's where the infantile neurosis take place. Now, here, if you take the oral phase, there are any number of components of the oral phase, component instincts. Right? And there are any number on this phase, on this phase, and later on. And all of them put together when you get to this phase, they get under the primacy of the genital zone. They then become subordinated to genitality. And so biting, kissing, smelling, touching, all of the things, licking, whatever else you can think of that you do, according to these phases, is what we call the four pleasurable activities. They are now subordinated to genitality. The purpose of them is to increase your excitement so that you can have sexual intercourse. And you can have an erection and a woman will get lubricated and wish you inside her, and then out of that union, the species will be preserved, Didn't that happen, we would have disappeared, right?
What are some of the component instincts of the phallic edible?
What?
What are the component instincts of the phallic edible?
Penetrating. Yeah. A lot of things get together in there.
Yeah.
But for a boy, it's a wish to penetrate, the wish to introduce his penis somewhere, to excitement in his penis, to be touched in his penis, to be sucked in his penis. For a woman, it's exactly the same thing, to be penetrated, to be licked, to be touched, to be masturbated, and things of that kind. But not as an end in itself. It's just to increase the level of excitement so that you can have intercourse and procreate. Otherwise, we will disappear. That's the whole purpose of the damn thing, yeah? In any case, there are many component instincts. Let's say here, let's take the other one. Sucking, licking. How do you spell licking?
L-I-C-K.
L?
L-I-C-K, yes.
L-A? I-C-K.
Yes.
Licking.
How did you know?
Licking.
She's talking to
Biting.
That's your oral.
Swallowing.
I didn't know how to spell that.
Yeah, you see there are any number of them. Any number of them. These are the component instincts. Oral component instincts of the sexual drive. Mm-hmm. And some people may have problems with sucking. Why? A woman may want to suck a penis, but for some reason that's not acceptable to her superego. And so she has a conflict. She wants to suck it, but it cannot do. Will create a lot of problems, for her. She wants, maybe, to have her husband ejaculation in her mouth. She wants the husband to come in her mouth. But something in her objects to that, and she, whatever it is. It depends on who they are and how these things have gone integrated into the character structure and personality. If that's the case, she may develop conversion symptoms. For example, a Globus Hystericus. You understand what I mean? It's in relation to that component instinct. It's not the whole sexual thing.
Yeah.
It's in relation to that one. And you have to go back there to understand what the nature of the conflict is. All right?
Dr. Nagera, I'm not remembering what Globus Hystericus means.
But what?
I'm not remembering what Globus Hystericus means.
Globus Hystericus means a feeling that you have something stuck in your throat that is very uncomfortable.
Okay, got it.
You want to get rid of it, you don't want to have it there.
Sure.
All right? So, the same is true of all of these phases. And where it is biting, for example, that may be highly conflicted. Some people have sort of cannibalistic fantasies. As I told you once, if you remember the lecture, in London we had a number of children who had problems biting. They could not eat anything that required biting. Had to be soft food. And when we look at them and say, why? I mean, some children, no, the children don't have any problem with this. Well, we found a number of things. We found that these were children that were weaned suddenly. And we say, oh, maybe that's what it is. that they win suddenly. But then we found a lot of other children that were win suddenly and didn't have problem with biting. So we said, well, that can be it. So we kept looking. And we said, well, these were children. We found a group of children that were win suddenly because they bit at the mother's nipple and hurt them.
Okay.
And so they were suddenly rejected. Well, we looked at a lot of cases, said we have the answer, no. We found cases where that had happened and the child had not developed. So we kept looking. And do you know what we found? That the mother had oral cannibalistic fantasies that were activated by the child biting at the nipple, and what she conveyed into the child was completely different from a mother that has pain. It was the horror of her own cannibalism. And these were the children that could not eat solid foods. And that never failed. You see the complexity of the phenomena? Well, if you have somebody like that, that's the root of the problem. And it may be an adult. You know what I mean? So, in any case, that's to give you an idea of what this thing means. I don't think this thing is very stable here, obviously. Put it back here. It'll be okay, I think. Now, what I wanted to convey to you, and I take a few minutes for this, is you start here. And Freud used a kind of metaphor that was very interesting. He said, in order to become a normal adult, you have to start here. He compared it to a general with an army, with so many soldiers. You have to go through all of these kind of provinces where there are problems that you have to deal with, all right? And so he said, imagine that you start with whatever you want to think of, 500 soldiers, yeah? And then, during the oral phase, some of these oral component instincts are quite troublesome. And in order to keep them at bay, you have to live here, 250. So, all you can move forward is 250. You have left a lot of your resources already at that phase. In fact, what you have done is created an important fixation point right there in order to deal with the rebels in the area, like now in Iraq and Fallujah or wherever it is, So he moves 250. Here there are all kind of problems. Let's say that you get here and you have to live here 150 soldiers. You move to this phase, which is the phallic Oedipal one, that is the big organizer. Is when all the neurotic conflicts are put together by the ego structure into a single entity called the infantile neurosis, so that is fighting in only one front, where all of these things are represented, but the front is here. Right. All right? If he gets here with 100, and the nature of the conflicts in the phallic Oedipal conflict, the enemy, is 150 soldiers, only 150, he can win there. Right. What does a good general do?
Comes back and gets more.
Retreats.
He creates a backdraft.
Retreat.
He retreats. Where? Here. 100 and 150 to 150, he can now stop there.
Right.
That's development. Depends how much you get to the organizer section of development, which is the phallic Oedipal phase between 3 and 5 years of age. How handicapped you get there, how many resources you have to deal with the conflicts of the phallic Oedipal phase. If you don't have enough, you have to go back to the regressive point. If Contrary to this, you live here 25 and here 15, and you move, 460 over here. You are quite strong. You are very likely.
Yeah, but they don't really do that, though. I mean,
What?
I've never seen that example. You give that example. We don't really do that, do we?
Oh yeah, there are people that does that. There are
Seriously,
people that
they mobilize from the earlier stages and bring it to. They're able
there are
to.
people that have very little conflicts in the oral phase or in the anal phase.
Okay.
The main conflicts are in the phallic Oedipal phase. Or hystericals, for example, personalities. That's what has happened to them. Now, most people have what is called a mixed neurosis, which means it has components from the oral phase, from the anal phase, and from the phallic Oedipal phase in different proportions, which means they left behind different number of troops. Now, obviously, it's instead of 150, here, what you confront, which is more likely is 350, you regress here. You now have 250. You still cannot deal with 350. They outnumber you. So what do? You go to the early phase. Now you have 500 against 350, and that you can fight them. But you organize your neurosis then around the oral fixation points. And even your castration anxiety will have characteristics from the oral phase. It'd be the fear that somebody will bite your penis off, or a dog, or whatever, instead of the example that I gave you of a child that is frightened of going to the barber shop because the barber may cut his ear off. Right. It's a different kind of fear. That's a higher level of fear. The other is a much more primitive level of fear, okay? Now, all of these things are part of the psychoanalytic theory of neurosis, whether they happen in the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic Oedipal phase. You can, of course, move to latency where things get neutralized, and finally in adolescence where all things get reactivated. And you have the other problem that now, whatever conflict you had not resolved, have behind them the energy of the sexual drive and the aggressive drive in a way that was not there before, particularly the sexual drive. So it becomes a heck of a lot more of a problem, yeah? All right, I hope you understand that. I hope you understand that when I put here the different component instincts, licking, biting, sucking, and all of that, if you think in terms of object relationships, that will manifest itself in the interaction with the objects in the sexual interaction. And there be a lot of licking, a lot of sucking, a lot of biting, a lot of whatever it is. And different people, depending on what component instincts are more important to them, either genetically or because of experiences that establish the fixation, will have these preferences. All right? On occasion, the activity is so enormously important that it substitutes for the genital. And so people doesn't want them to have intercourse. What they want is to suck a man and have it come in their mouth, not to have a man penetrate them vaginally. Or a man that has an anal fixation. He doesn't want to penetrate anyone. He wants somebody else to penetrate him. You understand what I mean? And so, as you see, all of these things will express themselves in the final form of the neurosis. The more you have of the earlier phases, the more apparent it will be in the manifest form of the neurosis that you have developed. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. All right. So that's important. It's obviously a metaphor, but it's a very useful metaphor that shows you that when you are born, you have so much energy to move to the phallic Oedipal phase. If you have to waste some of this energy fighting the conflicts of the earlier phases, when you go to the higher place where things get organized, you are forced to retreat. Where do you retreat to? To where your main fixation point is, wherever that is. All right? And that's where you organize your neurosis. And then your neurosis will have, let's say that it is in the anal phase, you will develop an obsessional neurosis. All right? or something akin to that, an obsession, an anal type of perversion, or an anal character structure, or whatever it is, but it be related to that fixation point. Okay? All right, let's stop and we go on